Hello, my dear friends. Today we are going to look at the memoirs of Untersturmführer Wolf Soff, battalion adjutant of the 6th Waffen SS Mountain Division NORD. We can say that he was involved in battles on the Eastern Front against the Red Army during the whole war, but then his unit was redeployed to confront the American forces. And that's going to be his story. Now let's begin. The flickering flames of an American tank burning behind me lit up a scene that could have been a pastoral at any other time. A winter coniferous and deciduous forest stretched wide on a gentle slope, crowned with a ridge just less than 100 meters away from us. The blizzard that wouldn't subside rapidly added to the snow's depth, muffling sounds and offering the impression of serenity. Behind the flames of the burning vehicle, the woods were hardly visible, obscured by darkness, or rather not by darkness, but by that vague twilight that arises from the reflected moonlight and mocks us, making us flinch at the sight of each shadow, and hiding the real dangers from us. It was yet early, about 7 a.m. We had blown up the enemy tank only a moment before, throwing the last long-handled grenade into the open hatch. I was in the vanguard of the 3rd Battalion of our 12th Regiment of the SS Mountain Infantry Division NORD, which was breaking out of the dense ring of encirclement. The remnants of the 11th Company, which had only 7 men left who had managed to fight their way out of the Vingen on Monterey, were moving out with the battalion. I chose this company to be at the forefront of our sneaky withdrawal from the enemy encirclement. The remaining battalion force, with only 110 men, was moving about 300 meters behind us. We could recognize the silhouette of an American tank only behind the turn of the forested mountain road on which we were ascending with the company commander, Untersturmführer. All of a sudden, a Sherman materialized out of the darkness, occupying the whole road at once. For some reason, we didn't notice the black monster from afar. Judging by the white 5-pointed star, it was an American tank, which had turned in the opposite direction from us. Up ahead, some dozen meters away, 6 of our soldiers had just slipped past the tank. Either they didn't notice it, or they didn't care about it. Sneaking closer to the tank, Untersturmführer and I both heard a conversation coming from the open hatch. Certainly the crew spotted that people had passed by the tank from the rear to the front line. We saw the tank's machine gun swing its barrel, aiming at our mountain riflemen who were slowly moving away into the darkness. As soon as the grenade we had thrown exploded in the tank, I jumped over the roadside ditch and ran into the woods, trying to find a bigger tree to hide behind. The ammunition could go off at any moment. Perhaps my fellow must have rushed off the other way. Now I was on my own. And worst of all, I didn't know better than to drop the American carbine I'd stopped up on in the Vingen, in addition to the pistol I had on my belt. It was suspiciously quiet in the forest, and I heard nothing but the crackle of the flames raging inside the tank. The fire hadn't reached the ammunition yet. It was actually the calm before the storm. A rifle shot rang out, and a 7.62 millimeter bullet pierced my right calf. That single shot was the opening scene of a hellish cacophony. In the light of the burning tank, I could see the rifleman sitting hunched over in a firing position 15 meters away from me, a bit higher up the slope. He was aiming, intending to shoot again. There was no time to grab the gun, so I decided to overwhelm him by dashing straight at him, following my instincts. But he still managed to shoot, but by some miracle he missed. Collapsing on him, I knocked the soldier slightly unconscious by punching his helmet with my fist. In the meantime, the enemy had awakened, and the Americans began to repel the attack from the rear. The growing sounds of gunfire were accompanied by the jerky staccato of machine gun bursts. Now it was surely time to find a place to hide, and I pushed the GI deeper into the hole, which now had to be shared by the 2 of us. As I stretched out my wounded leg, I felt something soft, and at first, I thought it was a dog curled up in a warm nook, but no, it was another GI who had never made it out of his sleeping bag. Throwing their rifles behind the breastwork, I, threatening the Americans with a Walter, declared them to be my prisoners. Taking my ski cap off my head, with Edelweiss's dead head and an eagle, the Americans obviously had nothing like that, I cautiously raised my head and looked around. What I had feared most of all was true. The neighboring firing positions were less than half a dozen meters on each side of my position. But so far, in the pre-dawn gloom, I wasn't recognized as an enemy. After this brief confrontation, our battalion regrouped, and my comrades suddenly assaulted the American position, on which I now by chance found myself. During the attack, silhouettes of our men passed close to me. It cost them nothing to throw a grenade into my hole. What a joke! Having saved myself by taking cover in an American trench, only to be killed by our soldiers half an hour later. While waving my ski cap in the air, I shouted desperately, "Over here! Over here!" But my shouts were in vain. My entreaties were immediately lost in the rumble of machine guns and automatic rifle bursts, the rattle of rifle fire, and the even more terrifying sounds of American mines falling everywhere. Without being able to attract my attention, I gave up trying, for I knew in advance that the assault we were undertaking would soon come to an end. Just 2 hours before, I had been gathering and distributing the remaining weapons and ammunition in the battalion. We had no more than 90 rounds per machine gun, a drop in the bucket, considering the capabilities of our new rapid-fire MG-42s. Predictably, our men retreated under the onslaught of the vastly superior American forces. Eventually, outflanking the enemy strongholds, the surviving soldiers of our 2 battalions leaked through the American defensive lines in small groups to join up safely with our Task Force Schreiber in the Rothbach Creek Valley later. As my men, accompanied by the blind bursts of American mines, disappeared into the woods, I continued to sit in the trench with 2 American soldiers. We began to talk quietly in English. It turned out that the long absence of practice had caused a lot of trouble with my poor school knowledge. It couldn't come in handy in the birch forests of North Karelia, where our unit had spent the entire war, except for the last week of fighting. Eventually, I figured out that the American I was sitting on was from Boston, and his buddy was from Texas. As far as I could understand, they weren't serving in this unit, but were assigned from an anti-tank platoon that was in cover. I finally had time to put a bandage on my wounded leg. Cracking open the field rations, my prisoners shared it with me. After eating, we had a few American cigarettes, which I'd thoughtfully obtained in Vingen. Then I got down to business, perhaps the most important in this situation, and pulled out a map from my clipboard, the one that marked our fallback position. Pulling out the piece I wanted, I burned it. I pondered feverishly, trying to formulate some kind of real plan to get out of this absurd situation and make my way to my people. Thank God I had a good sense of direction, and I didn't doubt in my mind that I would find them. But it didn't work out. I gave up my plan, praying that the early winter night would come soon. However, the night had passed only an hour or 2 ago. As I looked out of the hole once more, I saw that in the daylight the American soldiers were cautiously leaving their positions to look over the battlefield in front of, or, to be more precise, behind their defensive lines. It seemed that they were picking up the wounded in this section of the defense, first of their own, and maybe they would also pick up ours. Creaking through the snow, a small group with a sergeant in charge moved toward me. At the last moment, I managed to put the blanket of one of my prisoners over me. From under the blanket, I could hear the sergeant come to the breastwork and tell the Boston guy to join his group to go pick up the wounded. The second GI remained lying in a hidden part of the rifle hole where the sergeant's eyes couldn't reach. Under cover of the blanket, I poked him in the ribs with the muzzle of my Walter, hinting to him to find an intelligible excuse to stay put so as not to reveal my presence. I heard him mumble something like, "I feel bad," under the delicate pressure of my gun. In general, he didn't lie. The sergeant muttered something disapprovingly in response. He had no wish or time for bickering, however, so he went on to the next firing position. But it was too early to rejoice. About 15 minutes later, the same sergeant returned with a group of men and, speaking to the American, growled, "If you're so lazy that you won't get out of your foxhole, at least hand over that bloody blanket." Apparently, the blanket was required to carry the wounded. Not hesitating long, the sergeant grabbed the edge of the blanket and pulled it up. For a few long seconds, everyone went numb. I stared down at the Americans gathered around the trench, and they stared up at me, unable to believe their eyes. I was the first to come to my senses, pulling the clip out of my Walter. I threw the gun away to the trees. Only then did the group come to their senses, and everyone started shouting loudly, trying to drive me out of the foxhole. For the first time in several hours, I was on my feet and asked the sergeant to take me to the commander. I was immediately dragged somewhere to the south, and 2 of my former POWs got in trouble for their cowardice. After 1,000 and more days of fighting at the Arctic Circle with the Red Army, after a long 3 weeks of falling back through Finland and skirmishes with Finns, former comrades in arms, my standoff with the American Army ended after only a week of fighting in January 1945. That is all for today. If you found it interesting, please give it a like and support the channel by subscribing. Goodbye, everyone. Until next time.